Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Coming to Resolution. Today we're going to be talking about dealing with trauma and triggers because I feel like there's a lot of situations where people aren't dealing with those, and I have been the person who wasn't dealing with those things, and it was not beneficial for me at all. When I was learning how to deal with this stuff, it was a problem because I didn't I didn't fucking know, you know? Um, so whenever I was learning how to deal with this stuff, I'd be having a real like shitty day, and things just wouldn't be going right for me, and then suddenly I'd have a trigger to bring me back to a trauma. And in those moments, I didn't know how to deal with that. It's not like I just went and freaked out on people, but I was being an asshole, you know. Um, and I didn't validate it. I knew I was being an asshole. I had to learn how to not be okay with being an asshole, because I had spent a lot of my life being an angry person. I dealt with a lot of things as a child and even in my teenage years, and in adulthood, I don't deal with those things anymore because those people and that environment doesn't exist anymore. Um, but there are still days where I'll get a trigger or my brain will just decide to be a fucking asshole, and it'll it'll bring me back to a moment of trauma. And I'll have to kind of self-regulate in that moment because that's something that I can deal with later. Most of the time when this happens, I'm not in a spot where I can process and deal with the trigger or the trauma even. Most of the time it happens during my work day because my day starts pretty early, and most of the time doesn't end until almost evening. So it almost always happens somewhere in between then. There have been very few days, at least recently, where I've just had a free day and my brain is just going fucking wild on me, like it doesn't, for whatever reason, that's just how it works. But most of the time when this happens to me at work, it used to be I would I would treat my coworkers a certain way that I'm no longer okay with treating them in that way. Like I wouldn't just verbally attack them, but I was an asshole. You know what I mean? Um, and I'm not okay with doing that. I'm not okay with being the person who is miserable to work with or to even be around because I'm having a shitty day. You know what I mean? I don't do that. I don't do that to the people I care about. I don't do it to strangers. Like I don't be an asshole to people. I don't like being that person. Um, so I had to learn whenever those triggers would happen, or if I was just randomly brought to a trauma, I had to learn how to kind of put that on the back burner and process and deal with that in a healthy way later on, which took some time. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of having to catch myself in those moments. It took a lot of reflection because I'm the kind of person who if I'm reflecting on a certain moment or a certain action or something I said and I don't feel good about it, then um that's when it becomes a problem for me, and that's when I have to kick myself in the own ass and be like, okay, so next time let's maybe not fucking do this. You know, um, especially in those moments where I'm just emotional and dealing with something from way back when, and just not having a good time. Because there are certain traumas that I'm still dealing with in adulthood. There's still a few things that bother me, but I really try my best not to make it people's problems. There are a very select few people that I care to talk to about certain things like this. And I would trust those people with anything. I don't do that. I don't trust people generally. I don't just talk about things that um, affect me like that to anybody. I don't do that. Um, so I have had to learn to be okay with talking about that stuff to people that I trust because it used to be I didn't even trust other people, like people close to me, um, to talk about that kind of stuff with. So I had to learn to be okay with that, and then I had to learn not to come at it in an aggressive way. I had to learn how to not be an asshole whenever they were trying to ask clarifying questions because that would also be a thing sometimes is I would be in that trauma. I would be in that moment, and whenever I'm trying to talk about it, people would ask clarifying questions and they would because they didn't understand or maybe I wasn't making sense, whatever the case was, and they were just trying to help and I got an attitude. And that's a common thing that I've seen throughout my life. People will get upset and start screaming and yelling and cussing at people. And I didn't just yell at people personally. It if you saw me yelling at somebody, it wasn't because I was in a trauma. But people will scream and cuss and yell at people when they're in that moment because they maybe they don't know or maybe they're not ready to deal with certain traumas, like but they're emotionally irregulated and they don't know how to deal with that in a healthier manner. You know what I mean? And I get it. There was a time where I didn't know how to emotionally regulate. I didn't know how to catch myself in those moments of trauma response and not make it other people's problem. What I've had to learn to do whenever it comes to being in that moment is put that on the back burner and come at it from a place of acceptance where I'm not in such an emotional state and I'm not coming at it from um this fucking hurts and I never want to feel this again. Like, yes, that's true, but I'm not coming at it like that. I'm coming at it like this happened. There isn't anything I can do to change that. What are we going to do to prevent this in the future? You know what I mean? Because that's all about. I feel like that. I feel like if you have a certain trauma, depending on the situation, you should be trying to figure out how to prevent it from ever happening again. If that means setting boundaries early on in a friendship or a relationship or whatever, I think that's necessary. Um, if it comes to cutting people out of your life in order to protect your peace, I say do it. I've had to do that a lot. I don't speak to my own mother. No, I don't. When it comes to cutting people out of your life to protect your own peace, I think if if it is someone you know on the internet or someone you call a friend and they are constantly just triggering certain traumas and you tell them and you're setting boundaries and they decide to cross those boundaries and then I think that's when it's necessary. Um, in relationships, I think it's a little bit different because nobody goes into a relationship and just can pull up like a PDF about your traumatic experiences, you know what I mean? So if it's a relationship that you value and you see going the long run, like we were talking about in the last video, then I think it's necessary to have those conversations about what your boundaries are and what your triggers are. And then together you can figure out how to deal with that when that moment comes. And hopefully, your person is not someone who's going to sit there and trigger you intentionally. I have had that partner. It is not a fucking good time at all. Um, I think when it comes to that kind of like a romantic relationship, that's when I think those conversations are really necessary. Um, Not like this person's gonna hurt me because I've been traumatized. I'm gonna leave them before they can leave me, kind of thing. I think that's when you need to have actual conversations and kind of communicate where you're coming from and what certain triggers are, even if your person needs to write it down in their notes app or some shit, you know what I mean? Like, or if you need to send it in a text so they can screenshot it or something like that. Like that's important stuff to do in that kind of relationship. I'm not the person who's going to sit here and tell you to break up with somebody because they are triggering you when they don't know your triggers. You know what I mean? If they don't know your triggers, you haven't established any boundaries or whatever the case may be, it is not their fault that you got upset about something. Just like it is not my woman's fault that I get upset about something that she has no fucking clue upsets me. You know what I mean? I can't hold that against her because she didn't fucking know. Anyway, um, when you're dealing with those moments, those emotional moments of a trauma where you're getting a you get triggered and it brings you to a trauma. When you're dealing with that shit, I think it's important to note that no one around you is in your mind. No one can just look at you and tell what's wrong with you. If you're not ready to talk about it in that moment, I think it's important to express that. And whenever you're ready to have the conversation with them, if it's even worth talking about, um, then I think that's when that conversation needs to happen. When you can come at it from a calm point, you can talk about it in a I guess an educational way, so your person can learn, and maybe can even help you with it, or at least have a note taken to not do certain things. It's gonna happen again. It's gonna be unintentional. It is not going to be a one-time thing. You're going to deal with triggers in your relationships, in your friendships, and in day-to-day life all the time. And if you're not willing to have the conversations with your friends and your partners about what is upsetting you, then you're not going to take those friendships and those relationships super far. You know what I mean? Because it's going to come across as you're looking for a fight. You're looking to take your emotions out on someone, or they just are going to end up finding it miserable to even be around you for the simple fact that every time they are around you, something happens and they don't know what they did. They don't know your boundaries. They don't know how to approach a situation. They don't know. You know what I mean? Um, and I have been the person who had to learn that. It's something that I don't struggle with this anymore, but it's something I have to remind myself of. Like, people don't fucking know. If it's not something that I've expressed, how is anyone going to know? You know what I mean? And especially if it comes to a relationship that I can see going a very far length, like I want, um, then I'm going to have that conversation. I'm going to do my best to do it in a way that makes sense and is in a calm way. I'm not always going to be perfect at that. Nobody is. You're not going to be perfect at expressing what triggers you in a way that is making sense to them, or that doesn't come as just emotional, and maybe even you're a little shitty about it. It's not, you're not going to be perfect at it, but it's something to practice at so you can have those conversations with your person or your friends, depending on the level of friendship, I guess. You can come together about what is bothering you, and if they can help you deal with it, that's great. If they can't, then at least they know. You know what I mean? Um, but I've been in a lot of situations where I didn't handle trauma well. I've been in a lot of situations where I've seen people not handle trauma well. And it's not like it's necessarily their fault if they just don't know, but they're not handling it well, you know? I think it's really important when you get to that point of being able to process the trauma and the trigger, and you're able to do that in a calm way. I think it's really important to note to yourself that it happened. You're going to come at this from a place of acceptance, because you can't do shit about it now. It's already happened. You know what I mean? We don't have time machines. You can't go back and fix it. If you come at it from that way and you process and you can figure out a way to prevent that again, or at least prevent it from triggering you as much in the future, you're going to go a lot further than in terms of healing than I think a lot of other people are going to, who aren't coming at it from that kind of angle. Because there are certain traumas that are going to stick with you forever. There are certain traumas that you're never going to fully recover from. But you can choose to not allow yourself to be triggered by certain things, especially when people just don't know what your triggers are. And I think it's really important for certain traumas to be able to figure out how to prevent that again. If someone is going to push your boundaries intentionally and they're going to trigger you intentionally, then I think that is not a person who belongs in your life. I think that is somebody who you need to kick the fuck out and stay away from, because clearly it's not benefiting you, and all that they're getting out of your friendship when they do this is entertainment, because that's all that's going to be. Oh, look at that. They're mad again. Poke the bear. You know what I mean? Like, those friendships aren't fun. Relationships like that aren't fun. It's not a good time for anybody in those relationships. Now, you're if you're pursuing a romantic relationship, you're, especially if it's a new one, or you're trying again, or whatever the case is, it doesn't fucking matter. Or even if you're in a long-standing relationship and this hasn't been talked about yet, I think it's important to go through certain things that bother you and certain boundaries that you might have, and I think it's important to notate what triggers you have, because your person is going to unintentionally trigger you. Your person is going to unintentionally hurt you if they don't know. It's just how that's going to go. Your friends are going to do the same thing if they don't know. I'm not saying on introduction or a first date you need to go through the whole list of trauma. I'm not saying you need to do any of that shit, because you only do this with people that you are close to and you trust with this stuff. You don't just do this with everyone. But I think it's important to have those conversations when that moment comes. Don't be the person who's gonna go off on somebody for causing a trigger, because that's not gonna do you any favors, and they're just gonna be confused. You know what I mean? You're not gonna see it on the same page. I've been in a lot of situations where will two people will see things in a different way. Someone will be triggered by something, and the other person will not even have any fucking idea, And since triggered person is going off on them, they feel the need to defend themselves, and it turns into an argument. It can turn into a fist fight. There's a whole lot of things that come from that, and then there's no friendship there. There's no nothing there, because this one time it turned into an exchange of anger, instead of, hey, this bothered me, I need a minute, and I'm gonna step away just so I can deal with something. If you want to talk about it after, we can do that. But at the moment, I need to take a minute. You know, learn to be okay with stepping away, especially if it's a relationship, a romantic relationship. If it's something where you're in a trigger, or you're in a trauma, you get triggered and into a trauma. Um, I think it's really important to be able to learn to step away so you can deal with the emotions, because when you're in that trauma, when you're reliving that, you feel just about everything, if not absolutely everything that you did when dealing with that trauma. Now you're emotional, and you're not thinking correctly. Your brain's not working as it's supposed to, because you're fucking emotional. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to be able to catch that, and to be okay with, hey, I'm gonna take a little bit of time to just deal with this stuff really quickly, or even if I need to go out for an hour, or whatever the case is, whatever. Um, I think it's important to be able to do that, and then come back later and talk about it in a calm manner, and to just be able to communicate to each other, you know, um, because no person who loves you, genuinely loves you, whether they are in love with you, or they love you as a friend, or they love you as like you're a family member, whatever the case is, nobody is going to intentionally trigger you ever. And if it is someone who doesn't give a fuck about you and just gets entertainment out of starting shit, then they are absolutely going to intentionally trigger you. But in this situation, that's a little different. I think it's important to have those conversations, so that if and when the situation occurs again, you two can deal with it in a better way. Um, and that will then in turn help you lay down that groundwork that we were talking about in the last video. It turns into, you two are, if you're both traumatized from one thing or another, you two can have those conversations and talk about things, and you are putting the mortar where the bricks need to be, and you're laying it down thick as fuck. There ain't going to be no holes in that mortar. There's a stronger foundation under these bricks because of stuff like this. You know what I mean? Like, these conversations can really be beneficial. And if you're willing to talk about it with your person, and they're willing to talk about it with you, you two are going to go very fucking far. Especially if you can do it in a calm way, and you can learn to catch yourself when you're in that emotional moment, and not just take it out on them, or shut down on them, or whatever the case is. I've been guilty of a lot of this. I've done this, so I know how this goes. Um, I think it's going to take you very far in a romantic relationship if you can learn to deal with the emotions, and then have the conversation of what happened, because your person is not going to know. Your friends are not going to know. When it comes to work, in a workplace, nobody in that workplace truly gives a fuck about how you feel. Like, nobody. Everybody is there to collect a paycheck or to make money, depending on what the position is. You know what I mean? If you are at work and you're triggered by something or someone, whatever the case is, you kind of have to learn to put that shit on the back burner until you can deal with that, um in a calmer way. you know? Like it I get to this is my only real brag about whenever I get upset at work is I get to swing a hammer at shit and sometimes I get to break shit for the sake of doing my job or I get to lift heavy shit and those things all help me whenever I'm in that emotional state of mind, you know, because whenever I'm in that in the emotional brain thinking I'm not thinking correctly, I'm not doing things correctly. There's a lot of things going on there because my brain is just going a million miles an hour and I can't I can't shut it up, you know. So those kind of things help me to be able to deal with the emotions so I can come back to it at a later point and then in turn truly process what happened and prevent it from happening again. You know what I mean? So I want that talked about because I didn't know, and I feel like some people, maybe a lot of people, still don't know how to really deal with a trauma like that. And like I said, there are some of them there you are never going to fully recover from. Certain situations and certain traumas you may never recover from. But that doesn't mean that just because you are not fully recovered from certain traumas, because there are a lot of them like that out there, that you can't control how you respond to triggers. You know what I mean? Learning how to respond to triggers will help a lot, and learning how to come at it from a place of, yeah, that happened, and this is what we're going to do to prevent that from happening again. I think you're going to go very far. I think you're gonna be able to heal a whole lot more effectively than if you just didn't deal with it, or if you were the kind of person who uses substances to avoid feeling. You know, I've done that. It doesn't go well. Um, Whatever the case is, if you're using escapism, even, and that can, there's a lot of things that fall under escapism. You know, and escapism can be good depending on how you use it. You know, um, so I think it's an important conversation that we learn how to deal with triggers and we learn how to respond to them. And then in turn, we can start the healing process or continue the healing process because healing, I feel like, as most people know, is a roller coaster. You are never going to have a straight line of healing. You're never going to be constantly uphill. You're going to be up and down and up and down. You're going to have really good days. You might even have consecutively really good days. And then you're going to have really fucking bad days while you're on this healing journey. And I think that's really important to note whenever you're dealing with this shit because it is not the fact that you're not healing. It is the fact that you are healing. You're in the process of healing. And when you're in that process, sometimes shit really sucks. Sometimes shit really fucking bothers you. It may be things that would normally not bother you. It's just how that goes. You're gonna have a whole lot of up and down, but when you get to that point where you're on the up, you're on the rise, and it's the end of the roller coaster, you're gonna feel a whole lot fucking better than you did at the start of that roller coaster. You know what I mean? So that's all I have for that one. I just really felt like it was a necessary conversation. So I will be seeing you guys in the next one. Bye.